Today is Monday, June 29th, 2009. This is a special report. I'm your host, Harry Thomas. This come out of prisonplanet.com by Paul Joseph Watson. Red alert. The total takeover of America enters its final phase. The wholesale looting of America and the transfer of wealth and power over to the private banking elite who are setting up a world government, along with a complete obliteration of any remaining freedom to protest, resist, or even speak out against this agenda, is now entering its final phase as numerous different pieces of the jigsaw puzzle fall into place and portray a clear picture of tyranny. We are about to sound the death knell for the United States if one of the following attacks on our liberty, free speech, sovereignty, and right not to be ruled over by banking dictatorship is not fiercely opposed and crushed. Red alert number 1. The passage of the climate bill by the House and its likely approval by the Senate represents the entree for the complete and total subjugation of any freedoms we had left and the beginning of a nightmare regulation and suffocating control over every aspect of our personal lives by millions of green Stasi tasked with enforcing impossible to attain goals of 80% carbon dioxide reduction, all based on the manufactured threat of global warming. This bill will also sink the economy and create a great new depression, effectively obliterating America's first world status. It represents a transfer of power and wealth from both the U.S. government and the American taxpayer over to a system of world government and global regulation now being erected by means of the climate change hoax. This is far worse than just a new tax, as Republicans are complaining. This is the total takeover of the American economy by private banking interests through the carbon trading system. As we have attempted to warn, the major beneficiaries of the climate bill will be the elitists who own the carbon trading systems that will be used to handle the cap and trade program, namely Al Gore and Maurice Strong, two figures intimately involved in the long-standing movement to use the theory of man-made global warming as a mechanism for profit and social engineering. Red alert number 2. The seemingly endless economic bailouts represent the wholesale looting of the American taxpayer and the great theft of trillions of dollars by private banking interests who refuse to even disclose where the money went. Not satisfied with stealing tens of trillions under the Obama administration's new regulatory reform plan, the Federal Reserve is now trying to enrich itself with dictator powers that will give it complete control over the U.S. economy, handling them the authority to regulate and shut down any company whose activity it believes could threaten the economy and the markets. We must now rally and lobby more members of Congress to support Ron Paul's H.R. 1207 bill to audit the Federal Reserve and highlight the fact that Bernanke is spewing financial terrorism when he threatens an economic collapse, should the Fed be open to a scrutiny. Red alert number 3, federal hate crimes legislation, which in reality would criminalize thought crimes, had cleared the House and now faces the Senate as S909. The Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act, officially the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act. S909 is in direct violation of the First Amendment. It allows the federal government to prosecute people involved in hate speech, transmitted over television, radio, and the internet. The House version of the bill states, quote, whoever transmits in interstate or foreign commerce, radio, TV, internet, in any communication with the intent to coerce, intimidate, harass, or cause subsequential emotional distress to a person, using the electronic means to support severe, repeated, or hostile behavior, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 2 years or both. In other words, if a talk show host engages in hostile speech against a person or persons of the above-mentioned federally protected group, that talk show host will face federal prosecution and the prospect of a 2-year term in prison. The Megan Meyer Cyberbullying Prevention Act would summarily criticize free speech on the internet if it can be deemed in any way to have been harmful to an individual. This represents the end of political blogging and free speech on the World Wide Web. If both bills are not opposed and thrown out, then the First Amendment will become nothing more than a relic of a bygone age. Red Alert number 4. The Senate Bill S787, otherwise known as the Clean Water Restoration Act, would replace the language in the Regulatory Act currently using navigable waters with waters of the United States. What this means is that the government would essentially be able to regulate everything from standing water in floodplains to creeks that run behind businesses and residences, according to an environmental leader report. This represents a complete takeover of private land and waterways by the federal government, a total assault on private property rights, and a complete federalization of America's land and water. In a letter to Senate Environment and Public Works Chair Barbara Boxer and Ranking Member James Inhofe, the American Farm Bureau Federation said that the proposed law would extend to all waters anywhere from farm ponds to stormwater retention bases to roadside ditches to desert washes, streets and gutters, even to a puddle of rainwater, states the letter. For the first time in the 36-year history of the Act, activities have no impact on actual rivers and lakes would be subject to full federal regulation. If this bill becomes law, it will empower the federal government to seize private property on a whim, using similar powers that Communist China employed during Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward, where landowners had only their property violently confiscated and stolen by the government. If this bill passes the Senate, private property rights in the United States are effectively null and void, and the federal government would legally have the power to bulldoze families from their homes, as routinely happens in Communist China. Red Alert number 5. Amidst the myriad of assaults on Second Amendment rights of American citizens undertaken by the Obama administration during the course of its first year in office, the one that stands out the most alarming is the attempt to ban people who appear on the terrorist watch list from buying guns. But it isn't stopping terrorists from buying guns, surely a sensible measure to take. The problem is that the terrorist watch list, sometimes called the no-fly list, is not a list of likely terrorists. It is a sprawling database of innocent people that contains names of over 1 million Americans. This is the rise of 32% since 2007 alone. Members of Congress, nuns, war heroes, reverends, the former Assistant Attorney General, toddlers and children, the ACLU administrator, people with different names, and all Americans like Robert Johnson and Gary Smith have become caught in a vast tentacle of this list, documents the ACLU. Moreover, a person is included on the terrorist watch list is virtually impossible to get off it. The terror watch list is an ever-expanding tool in which to deny Americans the basic rights as well as to strip them completely of the Fourth Amendment. Now, it is being used to prevent law-abiding citizens from purchasing firearms. Legislation sponsored by the Government Accountability Office seeks to close the gap and prevent victims of the terrorist watch list from being able to purchase firearms. This represents a new end run around the Second Amendment and a concerted effort on behalf of the federal government to classify millions of innocent Americans as potential terrorists, thus stripping them of their constitutional right to own firearms. Red Alert number 6. Our right to protest any of the egregious assaults on the Constitution that are listed above is itself being removed by new law enforcement and Pentagon training manuals and guidelines that define protesting as domestic terrorism. Current Department of Defense anti-terrorism training course materials state that the exercise of the First Amendment rights in the U.S. constitutes terrorist activity. Over the last few years, we have documented countless examples of security assessment reports from the likes of the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI, as well as police training manuals, which state that anti-war protesters, gun owners, veterans, Ron Paul supporters, and those who merely cite the Constitution should be equated with extremists and domestic terrorists. The fact that the government is now treating people who merely criticize its conduct as domestic terrorists is the clearest signal possible that the United States has entered a period of history similar to Germany in the early 1930s, and that it can only be a matter of time before the right emergency provides the justification for dissidents to be targeted for roundups and mass imprisonment. No one can claim now that this is a merely paranoid delusion. The government itself is training its law enforcement and military arms that protesters and people who use their First Amendment rights are domestic terrorists. The last time this happened was under King George, shortly before the American Revolution. 1 minute to midnight. If we don't stand up in unison and exercise our right to protest and free speech now more than ever before, while pointing out the real terrorists who are those who would seek to destroy the freedoms enshrined in the Bill of Rights, then we may find ourselves doing our protesting behind the barbed wires and concrete blocks of an internment camp. The hour is late. The clock stands at 1 minute to midnight, and the federal government, through all the examples documented above, is on the verge of implementing nothing less than a total environmental, financial, and societal dictatorship and killing what once was the United States of America.